Hi, everybody. Follow along today as we read your social studies workbook, and we are starting on page 12 today. So please open up to page 12, pause the video here if you need to grab that. This section is called Adapting to Different Places. And if you look at that picture, it says this scene shows what a Native American village with longhouses might have looked like long ago. So these are a different type of home. They're called longhouses. No one knows how many people lived in North America 600 years ago. There may have been 10 or 15 million or even more. People lived in camps, villages, and towns all across the continent. Many of them traveled long distances to hunt, trade, and make war. The land they lived in shaped the way they lived. In turn, they shaped the land. The Native Americans of North America. There were hundreds of Native American groups in North America. Native peoples differed because the places in which they lived were different. Each group invented tools and developed skills suitable to the land around them. They learned to adapt or change. Again, they show us the meaning of that word there in context. Adapt or change. Adapt means change. To survive in the conditions they faced. For example, the Powhatans lived in what is now Virginia. Streams and rivers run through the woods there. To travel by water, the Powhatans learned to build canoes using large trees. They made sharp tools for carving out canoes from animal bones and stones. They depended on the rivers for food, too, and made traps, nets, and other tools to catch fish. While each Native American group was different, people in the same areas often shared ways of doing things. People call these cultural areas. Within each culture area, people lived under similar conditions. If you go to your book, here it says, to make a canoe, the Powhatans burned a large log and then dug out the charred wood. Write two ways this canoe shows how the Powhatan people used the resources that were around them. So think about what resources they're using around them to build those canoes. All right, page 13, and this top part actually goes with that picture of the longhouses. So list ways that people use natural resources for their homes and clothing, and circle examples in the picture. Now, this is important as you start noting today, is that people have to adapt to their environments. So the tools that they're using, the resources they're using, depend on where they live. Because you couldn't just go to a store back then and buy everything you needed. You really used what was around you. So where you lived mattered. For this reason, people from the same culture areas often had similar cultures. For example, Native Americans from the Great Plains lived on the grasslands that cover the middle part of North America. Many of them depended on the bison or buffalo to meet their needs. The bison was a large animal that once roamed the plains by the millions. On this one, I want you to look at the map and circle a Native American group that lived near the Cherokees and was part of the same culture area. Then draw a box around a group that lived near the Yokuts. Pause the video here and I want you to try that out and then we'll go over the answer. All right, let me pull up WebPaint here to go through this. So we should have circled the group of Native Americans that lived near the Cherokees and was part of the same culture area. So if I find the Cherokees, they're right here. So what lives near them but is part of that same southeast light green part of the key? Well, the closest one is this group right here called the Creek. Then we're going to draw a box around the group that lived near the Yokuts. So find the Yokuts right here. We're going to draw a box around a group that lives near them. I would say this group is probably closest, but if you put a box around this group, I would accept that as well. It's kind of hard to tell which one's closer. All right, page 14. Native American economies. The bison was key to the economy of many Plains people, such as the Cheyennes and Lakota. An economy is the system by which a group makes, shares, and uses goods. Remember, we talked about this in our last unit. So we use a market economy in the United States. The different Native American groups had different economy systems that they used. While some people farmed on the plains, life for many Native Americans there depended on bison. The animals supplied food, fuel, clothing, and coverings for teepees. People moved often, following bison herds across the plains. Native Americans of the northern woodlands, such as the Iroquois, often combined farming with hunting and gathering. Their housing styles varied. Two examples are longhouses and wigwams that were made from small trees, animal skins, and bark. In the Pacific Northwest, people such as Makah and Nootka depended on the sea. They were experts at catching fish, whales, and seals. These animals provided food, tools, and clothing. Everything the people in this area needed was nearby. Number 3. This painting shows a camp with teepees near the Great Lakes. Write how the people in the painting used the resources listed below. So look in this painting and try to see how are they using water? How are they using animal hides? How are they using trees? And how are they using plants? And write down one way they're using each of those resources. All right, page 15. As a result, they often lived in settled villages for at least part of the year. Using wood from the forests, they built sturdy wooden houses. They also used wood to carve impressive totem poles. Sorry, I lost my spot there. That displayed symbols of the natural world. Hunting and gathering were central to many groups living in the Southwest near what is now California and Nevada, such as the Cahuilla. Often, food was hard to find. Some groups traveled long distances to search for wild plants and animals. During the winters, they built homes partly underground. When they traveled, they often built simple shelters made of brush. That way, they could move quickly from one temporary home to another. The southwest area that is now Arizona and New Mexico is a dry land. Its resources, including water and trees, are often scarce. The Pueblo people of this area grew much of their food, including squash, corn, and beans. They also grew cotton to make into clothing. Farming was also the main activity for the Cherokees and other groups in the southeast. Native farmers planted corn, beans, and squash. After picking the foods, they dried and burned the remaining stalks and leaves. This added nutrients to the soil. People in this area were also expert hunters. They ate the meat of animals that they caught and made tools from the bones. Trade was another way Native Americans got the goods they needed and wanted. People from one area often traveled long distances to trade with Native Americans in other areas. Native Americans changed the land. Native Americans were skilled at using what the land gave them. They made and used tools to help them hunt and gather food or make farming easier. They also found ways to change the land so that it could better supply the things they needed. The Pueblo people had limited water available to them and used it carefully. They dug irrigation canals to bring water to their crops. Their use of irrigation shows that the Pueblos did not just adapt to the land, they actually changed it for their needs. Number 4. The Makah in the Pacific Northwest carved totem poles from huge trees found there. Circle the parts of the pole that symbolize bird. So go on through this and circle any parts of that pole that symbolize a bird. And get up web paint here, and if you circled the head of the bird, woo, or if you circled that wing of the bird, either of those would be acceptable answers there. Page 16 in this caption says, some Native Americans used fire to change the land to improve hunting or get rid of pests. Another way Native Americans changed the land was by setting fires in forests or grasslands. The fires helped in many ways. In California, Native peoples burned shrubs to help grow grasses that attracted deer and other animals. In the Southeast, burning forest underbrush also made deer hunting easier. Other groups used fire to get rid of pests. Some experts think that these fires forever changed the types of plants that grew in many parts of North America. In Florida, the Calusa people actually made some of the land on which they lived. Mound Key, an island, is thought to have been the site of the main Calusa town. The island itself is a mound of shells collected by the Calusas. Changing ways of life. Native Americans changed not only the land, but their own ways of living. Groups that were successful farmers Sorry, I keep losing my spot here. Groups that were successful farmers could stay in one place for long periods of time. They developed permanent types of homes. An example is the large longhouse built by the Iroquois in the northern woodlands. Remember, that was the picture on that first page. Native Americans on the plains changed their way of life dramatically too. In the 1500s, that was when they first traded with Spanish explorers for horses. The plains people became expert at using horses for hunting and in warfare. They gave up being farmers and kept on the move. This new means of transportation greatly changed their lives. Right here, you're going to write what type of culture areas, what type of economies they had in each of those areas. So pause the video here and look back and find the plains depended on the bison. The northern woodlands people used both farming and hunting gathering. What did the Pacific Northwest, Southeast, and Southwest use? Pause the video here and then we'll go over the answers. All right, let me pull up WebPaint here. So for the Pacific Northwest, what they did is they lived mainly off the sea. The Southeast did both farming and hunting gathering. And the people of the Southwest depended on agriculture or farming. Did you get those correct? If you look back in the text, you should have. For number 6, you can draw pictures to compare the foods eaten by Native Americans who are hunter-gatherers compared to the foods eaten by those who were farmers. So think about what was different between being a hunter-gatherer, what might you eat, compared to if you were farming, what might you eat. If you go to the next slide of the pear deck, you're going to answer number 7 to show what you know. So contrast the type of housing used by Native Americans who moved frequently with the people who stayed in one place. So what made their homes different if you were a tribe that moved around a lot compared to if you were a tribe that stayed in one place?